I do believe that the real win about all of this is freeing up humans to do more of the deep human thinking that we do best in terms of synthesizing information, prioritizing really quickly, sometimes around things that have not been explicitly defined. We need to set a clear constraint, like work in this sandbox, not in this other one. That second area is like workflow processes, how organizations and humans work, and getting a better picture on that. But in order for it to happen correctly, humans still need to be in the mix, closely inferring, hey, that is a good description of a process in our organization, or this is not, because this is making way too many assumptions.
If AI has ever made you stop and think, wait, what is happening? You're not alone. I'm Mo, and I'm a security researcher asking the same questions. On Curiouser and Curiouser, we're having open conversations with experts, researchers, and leaders working at the edge of this space, talking through how AI is taking shape, what's shifting, and how people inside the work are thinking about it as it happens. So join us and listen in as the conversation takes shape. Welcome to Curiouser and Curiouser. My name is Mo, and this is our first episode. I'm a security guy. I don't know if I'm an engineer or a project manager or product manager or an incident responder, as most people know me as, even though I've never formally been an incident response. I think it's just something that all security people have had to do.
Yeah.
And over 10 years, I think, unfortunately, my career has been a little too long. And we've seen way too many weird things. I remember the first wave of like cool things happening in security. It was cloud. And we saw like, all these jobs get created and all these jobs disappear and people taking on all this hypes and all these new vulnerabilities and stuff.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, we've got like all the zero trust stuff, right?
Yep.
And a couple of years later, we see platform consolidation and we see all these vendors buying up other vendors. We are in a very interesting world in terms of security. And one thing that I've learned as a practitioner, instead of asking what the heck is going on, it's why are things going on and how things are happening, and becoming more curious about things as they occur in our world.
Curiouser and Curiouser.
I would say so. So for our first episode, I thought it'd be really important to bring someone who is, in my opinion, the embodiment of what happens when you are too curious. And I'm really excited to introduce Julie Tsai. Julie has been a practitioner for at least 20 years.
Yeah, that's right.
At least. But I think you've had this really interesting background, and you've gone from being that super technical person, really low level in the weeds.
Yep.
And you jumped around and you developed this interesting skill set throughout a bunch of really interesting orgs.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, you ended up not only leading a company through like a couple successful exits, I think.
Yes,
You've
that's
gone
right.
through a couple. But now you're actually the tastemaker, which I think is a cool title. If you don't have a plaque with that, we got to make sure you go.
I like that. I like that a lot better than this concept of going to the dark side, right? Although maybe that's part of the gig in security. We're always like peeking around the corners at, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is kind of like you're a really great first person to have.
Oh.
And I say that because there's so many things changing right now. But I think it's really important to take a step back, and instead of focusing on the what is happening,
Right.
we focus on how we got here.
Yeah.
And I think you are one of those people that has that big picture vision. And we can kind of like talk about like exactly how we actually got to the place where we're at.
Yeah.
Which I've been avoiding saying it this entire time. AI.
Yeah, that was admirable.
I tried my hardest not to say it.
It was gonna be there.
Yeah. So I guess we can start off with just like why don't you tell us a little bit about your own experiences other than coming from my lens?
I was definitely driven by curiosity through most of my career, just wanting to understand how things work, and not necessarily. I think I came into this field not expecting to be in security, not expecting to go as deep as I did into the technology. But I found that when I was coming out of school, the most interesting things were happening on internet, basically Web 1.0. So you can kind of clock where I was in terms of like time, but it was changing everything around us. And originally, I'd gone to school planning to be a journalist where I could satisfy all those different, interests in a lot of different things. But it was really clear that there was this kind of tectonic shift that was happening in how people were both creating and distributing information. I knew that, like, okay, well, I have to understand more of this. And also that coming from a technical and engineering family, I've always had a core belief that the how really does make a big difference, that the how actually will influence the range of what is going to be, and also people's lens on the rest of it. So that worldview ends up getting impacted a lot by, actually touching the stuff that you have to work on or understanding how those things fit together. And so I spent a lot of my career as a sysadmin, like about 13 years, and then a lot of years doing basic uptime for reliability, but always often working in these teams that didn't have separate security teams. We were just doing security as part of the job. And over time, I had found that a lot of the messiest problems I couldn't stay away from that were also critical for the org ended up being in security. And so after probably kicking around for about like 15 years in full stack, one of my, I interviewed at a very large company, and there was a really insightful VP of N. She said, I think you should go talk to the security chief. He'd be really interested. I said, no, like, security has its silos, and I like seeing all these different things. But I ended up talking to him, really liking what the teams were working on and the impact that they could have. Being able to apply a lot of the DevOps knowledge, which in the earlier iterations was, in some ways one of the first major kind of like autonomous agent kind of developments in our business, and really liking the impact and the chance to pull everything together and to see, like, in this landscape of all these different things happening, with all this complexity, where were the major critical issues happening, and like how could we solve not just that but improve the whole as we go, because it was those moments, we have that saying, right, like, never waste a crisis. It's those moments where you can kind of shake the org awake and shake awake different practitioners in terms of, hey, like, if we turn around and look at this in a different way, or start peeling it back into fundamentals, like, you can get a whole bunch of different things going at the same time. So that's kind of what pulled me into security. And I think that we are on this cusp of this really interesting era right now. Like, I like to think in the in the years of being part of technology and engineering, this idea of punctuated equilibriums, where you have these big breakthrough moments. And I think we're at the ascent of one of those in terms of the scale and types of impacts that AI can have. And then things will sort of shift and reintegrate, and there's a sort of a new landscape and a new reality, but that's still informed by the old one. So you have these different moments in time that really make a difference, and I think we're at that onset of one right now.
Yeah. So it's like kind of tough to think about, like,
Yeah.
how we kind of moved from all doing all these things, and security being this very much hands-on piece, right?
Right.
Where we all really need to be deep in the weeds, and we all
Yeah.
need to be building all these things,
Yep.
and really on the ground level.
Yeah.
I've noticed that with at least with AI and some of the things that are starting to come in, practitioners are finding ways to, I wouldn't say become less hands-on,
Right.
but maybe change the way and change where their focuses are going.
Yes.
So it's interesting to see, like, where the actual value prop for like AI and like specifically the security industry is.
Yes.
So in your perspective, where do you think you see the most, or where have you already seen the most value for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two major places where I think people who are in the space are should continue to push really hard on. One is that, as you know, information security for a while now has been suffering from a sort of flood of too much information, too many tools. Most teams are nowhere near staffed up or equipped enough to, like, manage all of that information. And so very quickly, when you're trying to instrument a new infrastructure, like, you start bringing in some tools, and the massive information that everyone has to deal with in terms of just volume of logs, volume of interactions, volume of different identities, and then where is it going out into in the larger world, right? Becomes very quickly untenable for most teams. These are machine scale problems now, right? Because we were seeing this sort of shift. People like to make analogies about how the different industrial ages have applied to computing. And we can think of it a little bit as moving past that sort of first and second stage of manually created automation to automation and robots that create themselves, right? And I think that what has happened with most teams is that with all of the new tools and information and logs, it's been, if you don't get ahead of it with using the technology smartly or knowing where you need to dial in, it can sometimes feel like a liability trap for teams where they have too much information and they're just never going to get ahead of it. So I think that there is a really a clear mandate for, AI is very good for processing large amounts of data. And so let that become part of what's informing the organizational brain, the industry brain around security, and go from there. Now, that said, I do think that a lot of the sort of quicker actions that some of the companies are taking in terms of headcount and org are possibly premature. I think a lot of it comes back, in my opinion, to the pressures that the leadership have in terms of showing quarterly profits and yearly profits and being able to show, hey, we're going to be able to achieve these automation wins and cut this headcount. But the reality is that all of that automation and uplift needs tuning, it needs refinement, it needs this stuff is still being, the airplane is still being built while we're flying it, right? So what's really essential is that the practitioners and the experts are still close at hand, not just to refine on quality, but also to keep looking at it in terms of, are we building in the right assumptions? A lot of times, just when trying to work with some of the AI for less well-defined tasks, it will make certain assumptions about what it is that I'm looking for and try too quickly to be useful, too quickly to say here's your answer. And it's no, actually, the relevant signal and all of that was the ambiguous word in there, and so kind of figuring out hey, we're at the stage where AI and the people who are helping to create what this is producing, it still needs to be trained to fit us rather than us to fit it. So I think that just the scale problem is a huge one. I think the other insight that I heard recently from Professor Dr. Stuart Evans is that, hey, we're at this place now with agent automation and what AI can do, that it's not just about the data and analyzing it, as has been the game, I think, for the last maybe 10 years, but it's really at this point about systems of action, not systems of record, and for that, you need really good insight on workflow processes, how an organization works. And I would argue even the hidden pockets of what's going on that aren't all clear in the documentation. Actually, such and such process only works because, maybe you have 2 or 3 very seasoned people who are working directly with the head of production change, kind of overseeing it. So what is it? What intelligence are they bringing to the table in terms of being able to spot check when there's an issue or not, and when we offload some of those things from them, are they now able to do to really improve the organization and the processes? We should be thinking about what is that freeing them up to do? Because I do believe that the real win about all of this is freeing up humans to do more of the deep human thinking that we do best in terms of synthesizing information, prioritizing really quickly, sometimes around things that have not been explicitly defined, and being able to say, hey, actually the machine needs to work like this, or here's a place where we need to set a clear constraint, work in this sandbox, not in this other one, So I think that second area is workflow processes, how organizations and humans work, and getting a better picture on that. There's a lot of potential there for offloading some of the drudgery and things we don't think about. But in order for it to happen correctly, humans still need to be in the mix, closely inferring, hey, that is a good description of a process in our organization, or this is not, because this is just making way too many assumptions.
It's kind of interesting to see how not focused in security, right? But
yeah.
how the entire tech industry has adopted these types of philosophies
Yeah.
around like humans still in the loop.
Yeah.
But it's not how you would like initially imagine it. So if you like look around and even on like a LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
Actually, if you go and search like different I like to look at like what people are hiring for. It talks
Yeah.
about like what teams are doing,
Yeah.
what they're really like focused on internally, and it gives you a little bit of signal into like what sometimes roadmaps look like.
Yeah. That's right.
And I've seen a lot of these like tutor jobs come up, right?
Interesting.
For hiring humans to do an AI thing or
Yeah.
teach an AI something, some skill, right?
Yeah.
And it's never focused in a single domain. There's teachers, there are accountants,
Yeah.
there are lawyers, right? There are all these different types of things.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's because we're running out of things to train or data to train AI on, right?
Yeah.
And we're at a point as, humans where there's only so much written stuff we have.
Yeah.
And eventually the content that we're starting to create is now AI synthesized, right?
Yeah.
So we're losing a bit of originality as time continues to go.
Yes.
So how do you get it? You explicitly hire humans to do a human job, and you teach AI how to do the human job in a new way every single day.
Getting back to the original source.
Right.
You know.
And another thing I recently heard is that if you look at like a GPU or like
Yeah.
comparing a GPU to headcount,
Yeah.
right? For the same amount of money that you'd spend on maybe one or two humans,
Yeah.
at like a Bay Area average, you could get a couple of GPUs or quite a few GPUs,
Right.
and you have like 10,000 people right there.
The equivalent, right.
Right. In terms of like AI agents and this, again, scalable resource that never sleeps, that
Right.
doesn't ask for PTO. And I heard a funny joke that it's now a write-off, right? As a business expense. I
Sure,
have no
yeah.
idea if
It
that's
should
true
be,
or not.
yeah.
And you look at the people who are affected by this the most, it's not going to be the people at the top who are thinking, right? It's
Right, yeah.
the people who are entering fields. And there's a lot of concern around like, how do we help these new folks get
Yeah.
into something, right? How do we train them to do something? And it's a little bit scary to think about when you see leaders talk about, well, instead of having this new headcount, why don't we see and validate and see if AI can do it first?
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, I think, a perfect opportunity to bring in someone new to the field.
Right.
It's not like companies are exactly creating environments where
Yeah.
you can retain talent for many years at a time. I mean, we've seen
Yeah.
talents get cycled and very quickly in the last couple of years because of an AI. I think we're at a very interesting dichotomy between like the practitioner and
Yeah.
the organization as well as technology, where they're all kind of coming to an impasse in
Right.
some way, where it's like, how do we make the stakeholders happy? How do we make people happy?
Yeah.
And then how do we actually utilize people to the best of their capabilities now?
Yeah, completely. It's interesting. Nowadays, I think that like I get hit up on LinkedIn more often for colleagues like kids rather than themselves, like looking for those initial opportunities. And I think it does get to some of the thinking I think in orgs that's a little bit short-sighted.
Mhm.
I am a believer that there are certain lessons we can learn from history, that it's not going to repeat itself, but it will have that it rhymes. There will be parallels. And if I think back to like what was happening with cloud and even Web 1.0, aside from like the decimation of certain industries, is that what ended up happening, at least in the sysadmin world, let's say for like cloud, is that I think the jobs ended up getting squeezed up the stack, where like people started becoming more like DevOps or like software where, or they went deeper into the stack where they were working for these the bigger computing cloud companies, right? Like the Googles, the Amazons, let's say Rackspace. The market was changing. There was still work that needed to be done, but it was changing. Or people went out laterally and kind of spread into these other areas. And I think that, like these shifts, and that was what I would call an incremental change. Like if I think about another one, right? Like so Web 1.0 had like, and even today had massive, massive changes on, let's say, journalism, right? That used to be a whole different industry. And, there'd be institutions and people who kind of work their way up. And I know because I kind of apprenticed in that area a little bit when I was in college. But if you see today, there's way more content than there's ever been. right? In a lot of ways, it democratized both the access to that information as well as that content creation. Like people of all stripes had access to creating something that's considered like commercial or production level quality and like being as big as they want to be. And we see that with, people being able to make names for themselves, like in very, very quickly, in months, like not even a year, whereas like in the older days, like you might have worked like for a decade to achieve a name somewhere, right?
Mhm.
And so all of that is to say that, it doesn't change the driver of what's needing to be done. What's needed to be done is companies are trying to make things go more efficiently. People are trying to automate away the drudge work parts of their jobs to kind of free them up a little bit. And all of those things, the opening up of time and the opening up of different facets that are coming together and not seen before, can open up whole new fields. And I think that we're hearing bits and pieces of it, and we're at the early stages now. Like, let's say like doctors being able to access, trained LLMs on particular disciplines are able to diagnose an issue much more quickly for a particular patient, especially people who are outside of R&D hubs. Maybe they have access to information in a whole different way that wouldn't have been possible before. Maybe legal cases can get expedited more quickly in terms of helping people process not just the gritty work of just preparation, but also of helping people expedite the solutions faster. Like, let's say being able to say like, hey, 98% of these cases with this kind of information is going to go in this direction.
Mhm.
Maybe it will get people to where they need to land ultimately, So, I mean, there's a lot of things that like you can see in like, hey, if that can make something go faster, it doesn't just free people up for idleness. It frees people up to now think about things in a different way and apply those efforts in like, what's that next thing,
Yeah. And I think you bring up a couple of like really, really interesting points, especially around enablement,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Where like AI has for sure like enabled people to do some amazing stuff. Like
Yeah.
I know for me, the last time I did a coding interview, I was a junior level coding person, and it was a couple of years ago. And nowadays, I've spoken to a couple of people who are doing coding interviews, and a lot of it is like, oh, well, we're actually asking people to use AI in these interviews,
Yeah.
and then be able to explain
Yes.
how it's getting to that solution and
That's
why
right.
it actually works, right?
Yeah.
But there's that part, that second part, which I think is the piece we're losing the most nowadays.
Yeah.
A lot of these solutions that, like, you're talking about, and the things that people are expecting AI to do, right? Being able to read content, um, summarize it,
Right.
or be able to contextualize data, and then give you an accurate end goal is not always going to happen,
That's
right?
right.
There's still like this kind of fuzzy, like, do we actually feel good about like the results? Do we
Right.
feel like the quality of this is good? Do we know that it's like foolproof? I
Yeah.
think these things are like, again, these are like questions that are up in the air, but for businesses, sometimes it's like a very much like a, whoa, this is a make or break moment.
Right.
But specifically, there's this, my friend was recently on a podcast about, she works for Raspberry Pi,
Ah, nice.
and
Yeah.
Raspberry Pi, massive education
Yes.
program that they have, and they do a lot of community service.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things that she brought up on the program was that with AI, we're kind of losing this piece of education, which is kind of like a struggle,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So right now, a lot of these like A to Z solutions,
Yeah.
we miss out on learning the rest of the alphabet,
Yeah.
and we
That's
kind
right.
of are starting to accept Z.
Yeah.
And as we see this in orgs, we're seeing things go wrong,
Yes.
right? Because eventually, enough times you keep stacking a bad solution or a bad outcome that
Right.
you're not really catching, eventually it comes down. So I guess in that sense, when we look at solutions, let's specifically look
Yeah.
at security really quick.
Yeah.
What is like the right balance of like getting things done and then learning how to get things done?
Yeah.
Or like when should a solution maybe not actually solve your problem, but
Right.
make it easier to solve?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, I'm around enough sort of school age children to kind of watch a bit on how they learn nowadays. And I think that where I've come down on a lot of this in terms of, sort of these basics of like, when is it okay to take a technology assist versus doing the work yourself, is that you should take the technology assist when you actually don't need it. on some level, because now you already know how to do it. I think about like that transition when you tell kids like, hey, now you're going to use that scientific calculator to do your math because we want you to do all this advanced stuff. But like the point at which you give them that calculator is when they already know how to do their basic arithmetic, because if they don't learn it in the beginning, they're probably never going to learn it later, right? And so when I think about like, how people are ingesting information, I think a lot of it, both from a technical and a layperson standpoint, is getting back to understanding why I trust something. It's great that it gave some like nice, smooth, shrink-wrapped answer, but tell me, why is it I trust that particular piece of data or that conclusion? For instance, I was recently looking for some validation on different things that had taken different names and like who they were owned by and that kind of thing. So I asked, okay, like, is this a name that like is owned by someone? And it would come back with an answer like, it's likely XYZ, but the tell in there to me was the likely. It's like, okay, it's not for sure. You're trying to give me an answer that sounds conclusive, but the truth is that like, this hasn't actually been taken. So I think getting people and orgs back to that point of understanding, like, why do you know this is true? And in the same way that like a good manager or like a good, process check person knows how to size up something from a spot check. It's like when we're doing security testing, right? Like sometimes we can't test every single component. So what we might do is we might test a sample, right? And say like, okay, based on this, I'm making some assumptions about the quality and I'm going to keep checking. And I think that with how we use with AI, I think that like part of what needs to be built in is the sense of like, when am I double checking like on whether it's still on the track of giving me insights versus it's now starting to go down a derivative, more skewed track, right? This kind of idea when we think about, information getting watered down over time, right? And I think this has shown up in a couple of AI studies in terms of like something going further and further off the rails, depending on which way you were steering a conversation, right? Where it's like, okay, it's picking up more and more derivative things from the data that's there. As you said, like the massive data has been analyzed, but it's not picking up new context. It's not picking up new aspects of the whole view. Like, and I think this is where we're starting to see more of a push towards like smaller, more specific samples, world samples, things that are tied to more like empirical points to verify. It's like, what are those kind of tethers to the truth, right? And when are we checking in, and how do we teach ourselves, the AI, but also ourselves as consumers, when something is coming across as high integrity information? Is this high integrity information or is this low integrity, right? Like as a human, I might naturally pick up, like, I have low confidence about this thing because, there are all sorts of inconsistencies in like a situation or like or someone's reputation, right? And then the AI is sort of methodically trying to absorb that intuition, right? But there might be a whole data set or whole area that it hasn't absorbed yet. And you may or may not have visibility, right?
Yeah.
So getting back to knowing like, okay, what's in that sauce? What data sets were gone in there? Like what were the weights? I hear the argument from some that like the traceability or the explainability won't scale, that it's because of the billions and trillions of calculations that are going on that like we can't reduce it all down. But I think this gets back to having meaningful abstractions or meaningful summaries at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, there has to be transparency, and it needs to be human readable transparency.
That's right.
Just because it's operating in a way that we don't understand doesn't mean that we can't understand how it's getting there.
Yes.
Or we shouldn't, right?
That's right.
And I think this it actually explains a trend that I saw last year at Alex Stamos had done this really good talk, and one of the points of the talk that he made was there's the adoption of AI, right? Which teams are adopting AI the fastest? Can you take a guess at the top one? Incident response, right?
Yes,
And Dart cert teams are one of the fastest growing teams for adopting this stuff. It's because they have so much data, right?
Right, that's right.
A lot of these, the things that they have to do is operationalize. Right. It's already very transparent in like how you respond to certain types of things. For years, we've had organizations that have been doing anomaly detection, right? Basically machine learning, which again can morph into AI if the vendor is actually doing it properly.
Right. That's right.
But again, these teams are really well positioned for it. On the other side, one of the lower adopting teams for AI is one of my favorite teams, application security. I love that.
Yeah.
It's my bread and butter, and I love it.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's one of the biggest gaps and really interesting things in just terms of I think if you solving the AppSec problem actually solves a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And not necessarily around SaaS, DAST, even though there are some really great AI solutions to those spaces. I think that the threat modeling piece is actually one of the more interesting parts for me. When we look at how offensive AI frameworks have kind of evolved over the last couple of years, with like auto attack and even like some of the open source frameworks that have been created by other countries.
Yes.
A lot of those, we're seeing more ability for AI to go and identify different areas in a perimeter or an application and go plan an attack sequence, right?
Yeah.
I would love to see this kind of be utilized in an application security kind of way without actually having to like hit an environment or like really exploit, right? Instead being able to like kind of map and go through infrastructure.
Right.
And in this case, I think AppSec has been a little bit slower to adopt it because there's honestly too much work for AppSec professionals.
Yeah, that's right. You're just drowning. Yeah.
Literally all the time.
Yeah.
But two, the other side of that, there's an expertise that's needed, right? For these very niche areas. And the great part about AI is that it knows all the known patterns, but it doesn't know the things that haven't been found by humans before.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So it can find patterns, but it can't find like novel new, or at least it's not finding novel new as much as we'd like to.
Let me ask you this. One of my contacts, Paulo, likes to say, like, generative AI has no place at defense at scale. And I understand what he means, because I want to be able to trace it back. I want to know what happened. What do you think about generative AI as a source of creativity for those attack generations? Is it useful or is it too random?
No, I think it's really good, right? Like, if you want to talk about random, we can talk about fuzzing, right?
Sure.
Like as a really like low level concept of just like, oh, we just like throw a bunch of different strings, or we create like these, we have like some known patterns that we are going to use, or we have a couple of characters we want to try, right?
Yeah.
And throwing it, eventually something's going to stick.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
It's just super, super simple. It's going to happen. In this case, human creativity ends at like what you know as an individual. So if you can't think beyond the things that you know, you're kind of done, unfortunately. This is like a great thing about AI, right? You may not be an expert in all of these other fields. You may just know enough, right? Mm-hmm. But you can go and quickly expand on your set of knowledge very quickly. So from the education standpoint, going back to a little bit about stopping and struggling.
Yeah.
AI is actually great at helping an offensive security person struggle. And
I like that.
It's a really good way of really teaching yourself something fast.
Yeah.
And being able to iterate and POC it very quickly.
Yeah.
So if you know enough about maybe writing your own tools, or let's say, for instance, like one of the fun things I had been playing around with was there's this dude open source like Elder Pliny or something like that. Okay. It's named after the beer.
I was just wondering.
It sounds like the beer.
It does.
He did this really cool thing where he has this tool that goes and does a bunch of these permutations on characters, right?
Yeah.
So you could go and say something in a different language, or you can use different characters from different Unicode, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's like so good at prompt injection, like not by itself, right? But if you know the type of prompts you're trying to make and you just need to change a couple of characters, like you can get everything else through. It's really interesting to see like, okay, well, what if I just swap out a couple of characters for something that looks like this, right?
Yeah.
I know in a couple of the things that our team has found, we got through something by using or like a guardrail.
Yeah.
By using invisible characters.
Yes.
Right.
I love it.
And there's this one of our researchers actually said this like really great thing which was you're never actually, like, when we're doing offensive security, at least in the spectrum of AI,
Yeah.
you're just asking it to do something it already wants to do, right? You're never asking something that it cannot do, or you're not asking it to
Right.
break its rules, right?
Right.
It's always something that's within the scope of its ability.
Yeah.
You're just asking it in a way that it can't understand or isn't
Yeah.
supposed to understand.
I could see that. And this is where I think it's going to be really interesting to see, what are the things that, that AI is generating that's new versus like what is it that humans generate that is new. And I'm going to challenge a little bit this idea of humans only being able to create what we know, because I think that if we go back and look at what were major breakthroughs in, any realm, people were pushing through something to in a new way, and I think that, like, if I get back to like, what is it that drives true creativity, useful creativity, right? I think there is a combination of the curiosity and the discomfort, which is driving the purpose, and experience. I'll use an example of, Mark Burgess, who is the father of the DevOps tooling and a lot of the automation and early versions of agents on systems, right? Got the idea for a self-healing system that would enforce what it knows to be correct, even beyond an explicit instruction, thinking about people getting sick on an airplane in a bit of a petri dish environment, or if I think about, when penicillin was discovered, people having that accident of the scientists had, I think, discovered it after having some mold, occur in the lab environment. And I think what's really key there is this combination of different experiences that are, I would say, today outside the realm of what AI can experience, that kind of experiencing that combination of the physical and the biological constraints and how it motivates a different thinking about systems and the purpose of what one is trying to do. Out of all the things that were happening on that airplane, or all of the things that were going right or wrong in that lab, why did that person or that consciousness pick that one thing as being relevant? And that, I think, is a core feature of human intelligence. Being able to intuit or to prioritize something quickly from an almost infinite amount of inputs that haven't been described in consistent ways. Whereas like when we're training AI is able to like hit this like level of scale and complexity on a particular type of data that is created, right? Digital data that is organized in a particular way that it knows how to ingest, We as animals are picking up a lot of information from different places. And when you think about like, children or animals or how they interact with threats, right? They do very, very quick anomaly detection, right? This is unfamiliar. This feels a little bit off. And I might be able to pick up, it was a sound, it was a smell, it was a rhythm in how someone did something. And why did I pick that one thing versus everything else?
Yeah, it's a lot of intuition and being able to see like patterns in entropy, right?
Yes.
So
that's right.
Like we're good at pattern detection.
That's right.
And it's kind of biological as well, right?
That's right.
So it's being able to see, there's like the pop psych book Blink,
yeah.
right? Being able to know that within 30 seconds of an interaction, you're like able to understand if this person's going to be your best friend or not.
yeah.
Like something like that, like,
right?
You just have that gut feeling.
Yeah.
So this is like, you're right. Like there are things that only humans can do because it's like that intuition is the one thing that keeps humanity I think, right ahead, right?
Yes.
I think there, and again, I'm not pro robot or pro AI,
it's just something that's happening in the world, and we are deeply in it. Yeah,
love AI, just in case,
of course.
But there's a company right now that is just doing AI-based research.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is using AI to do research tasks.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all it does. So you ask it a question, and it only does, and it's tens of thousands of dollars to make a query.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of resources it takes to run the models and actually go through all this data set. It takes like 24 hours to get back to you. And that and I'll probably have to link to a resource of some sort.
Yeah.
But they were able to actually make some breakthroughs, specifically in the field of diabetes because of it, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of leads you to think like, can AI recreate the human experience at some point?
Yeah.
And I think it will eventually. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that, I think today, if I had to think back, and again, I wasn't alive then, but if I had to think back to when computers fit into a single, like, one-bedroom apartment,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Now we're at that same place with AI. We're like, the
Yes.
amount of resources it takes to do this one thing is incredibly huge.
Right.
um, it's going to eventually be really cheap to do this one thing,
Right.
right? I imagine
Reduce
that
it down.
exactly. I imagine that as like chains
Right.
open up and people actually start using AI to make better chips, right?
Right.
And we are able to fit more on that little piece of silicon,
Yeah.
right? Or whatever then the next thing is. I'm not in hardware, unfortunately,
But it should be expediting all those
right.
patterns very fast. To your point about like, why is it that SOCs and certs are getting that benefit first? Because we have procedurized certain things, and then you can just apply some scale with some parameters of creativity, right?
Yeah.
And so it, absolutely, what it should be doing is being able to rip through these masses of information and events that are happening that normally might take armies of people or years to like put together all that information to land in the right place, right? So that I think is like a huge step forward for us in so many ways. There are many areas where say, hey, if we had the ability to apply this analysis quickly to this like huge massive data, you can get to a new research insight or a better decision quality, right? And I think that's where we can all benefit from it. But I think that in addition to this idea of like what we are bringing to the table, I think we also have to be aware of where are we going to make sure we are not abdicating, right? I had a friend in school who used to, talk about, the slippery slope argument. Like, okay, we're on the slope; it's just going to keep going. She said, that's BS. Like, I get to choose where to stop on that slope. I get to choose. So on some level, um, we are the ones who are launching the like AI revolution and saying, applying it to all these things and making decisions on whether to make decisions on it or not. In that process, we can't abdicate our own sense or our own knowledge on like when to be there or when to say like, okay, this right now needs to be that human decision, or I am in the process of improving this, so we're going to stay close.
Yeah. Just to wrap up, right?
Yeah.
We've gone over all these things that AI can and can't do. What's something that you're looking forward to doing this year, or something you're really hoping that you've seen it this year?
I would love to see AI help make advances, especially in medicine and healthcare. I would love to see those inventions of, a lot of the stuff around information on the gene or, immunotherapies that are happening seems to be making these massive strides. Tailored and personalized medicine, or even helping people to get through insurance bureaucracy. I feel like that would be a really human-centered thing. Of course, in the cyber world, I have hope that we can get a little bit more or a lot more of the advantage back to the defenders. But I think it's going to come back to not just using AI, but also about getting back to first principles on, what does it mean to be smart about the attack surface, right? Because, a lot of us have felt for a long time that it's that leaky bucket that, you're trying to get the water out of the boat, but like it just keeps coming back in. And so I think that like if it causes people to, kind of wake up a little bit and be like, wait, how are we doing this in a way that's just not sustainable? I think that would be pretty huge. But I do believe through all of this, it's not a moment for, hiding or being fearful. It's a moment for really understanding what's going into this, that we have created this, and to stay engaged to make it better, right? There is all this potential. There are all these like things that we are fearful of, but at the end of the day, we're the ones who hold the keys on this.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, again, I wish we had like another hour to talk about like, all the great civic stuff that we can do with
Yes.
AI, right?
Yeah.
And
That'll be
all
one of
the-
your other
Yeah. But
next episode.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
Sometime soon. But there's a lot that we can gain
Right.
from this, and we really should be focusing on enablement, right?
That's right.
Really understanding the risks that are associated and then making some smart decisions around those.
Absolutely.
I don't think we should be shying away from this at all. I think we should be going head first, but we should be conscious and we should be cognizant, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, you should never let a good incident go to waste.
Right.
I'm hoping that we don't have to have
Exactly.
one here, right? I'm hoping that we can just kind of move forward. But I think that's what we've got for today. So is there any thing that you want to plug? Are you going to be anywhere? Do you want to share your socials with everybody? Yeah.
Sure. So if you're interested in getting in touch with me or seeing some of the things I'm involved with, I will be working on some events with Ballistic Venture Capital. We run a series called the Shift Now webinar about application security and AI, as well as with AI insiders in the Bay Area. I'm on email and on Twitter, and you can find my contact information on julietsai.net. And it's always a pleasure to hang out with you, Mo, and get really dive into all this stuff. I feel like in some weird way, we as security people can, help people to understand what the components of trust are.
I got into security because product is so hard for everybody to understand.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we have an opportunity to make product a lot better through quality, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Safety and quality in this age, especially, I think safety and quality are one and the same.
That's right.
So when you can trust something and when you feel safe about it, that's it. So with that being said, if you need me, it's needmo.info. Happy. Thank you so much for letting us hear and hear your dogs and everything. Yeah, super excited. Until then, see you next time.
If this episode helped cut through the noise, like or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for spending time with us. Until next time, stay curious.